Selamat siang, saya ucapkan Bapak Ibu semua dan selamat datang dalam webinar bertajuk Protecting and Expanding Civic Space, a Discussion on Perspective and Experiences yang diselenggarakan dalam rangka meluncurkan dan memperkenalkan C20 Sub-Working Group on Civic Space melalui kanal Zoom pada hari ini, tanggal 14 April 2020 pukul 3 hingga 5 WIB. Perkenalkan Bapak Ibu, nama saya Jenny Wongkar, anggota dari Working Group Civic Space dan Kepala Divisi dari Tata Kelola Lingkungan Hidup dan Keadilan Iklim di Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. Dan pada diskusi pada hari ini, saya akan berperan sebagai moderator yang akan memandu jalannya diskusi pada hari ini. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you, wherever you are, and welcome to the webinar entitled Protecting and Expanding Civic Space, Discussion on Perspective and Experiences, which was held in aim to launch and also introduce the C20 Sub-Working Group on Civic Space. This webinar is being held today on April 14th, 2020 at 3 until 5 p.m. Eastern Indonesia time, via Zoom meetings and live stream at PSHK Indonesia YouTube channel. Warm greetings to all of you. My name is Jenny Wongkar, member of the Civic Space Working Group and head of the Division of Environmental Governance and Climate Justice at Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. And in today's discussion, I will be acting as a moderator who will guide throughout the discussion. Guna kelancaran webinar pada hari ini, maka saya akan membacakan beberapa aturan yang sekiranya perlu disampaikan dan dicermati bersama selama pelaksanaan webinar guna kelancaran webinar hari ini. Pertama, webinar ini akan saya pandu secara bilingual menggunakan bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Inggris menyesuaikan dengan paparan narasumber dan pertanyaan yang diajukan. Sehingga, untuk peserta yang membutuhkan interpretasi, dipersilakan untuk menyalakan fitur interpretasi yang dapat ditemukan pada kolom bawah pada layar Zoom masing-masing. Translator kami, Kak Melati Dewi dan Anissa Junaidi, akan dengan sangat senang hati membantu dan mentranslasikan dari bahasa Indonesia ke bahasa Inggris dan sebaliknya, selama webinar ini berlangsung. Kami juga menyediakan juru bahasa isyarat untuk mempermudah teman-teman disabilitas rungu dalam mengikuti diskusi pada hari ini, sebagaimana dapat terlihat saat ini dalam layar Zoom Anda. Jika ada pertanyaan, peserta hanya dapat menuliskan pertanyaan melalui fitur Q&A melalui Zoom dan kolom chat YouTube sepanjang diskusi berlangsung dengan mencantumkan kepada siapa nama narasumber yang dituju. Dan jika waktu terbatas, moderator yakni saya akan memilih pertanyaan yang telah masuk baik dalam fitur Q&A Zoom maupun pada kolom chat YouTube. Bapak Ibu sekalian, Civil 20 atau C20 sejatinya merupakan salah satu...
Ladies and gentlemen, C20 is the engagement group of C20 itself. C20 is having a role as the platform to unite the civil society voice all over the world, to take the participation of civil society from the world for all the leaders in the G20. So today, we will have discussion related to the challenges and how to move forward to realization. Three things. First, the protection and expansion of civic space. Secondly, put an end to attack stigmatization, and civil society actors. And the last one, build and strengthen partnership. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Gita Putri Damayana as the Executive Director of Indonesian Center for Law and Policy Studies for welcoming remarks for the 20 Civic Space Working Group. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Gita Putri Damayana,
PSHK, and I'm also representing the Civic Space Sub-Working Group. Co-chairing here with PSHK are YAPPIKA and Penabulu, both organizations based in Jakarta. And our moderator, Jenny Wongkar, is the head of the Governance and Climate Justice from the Indonesia Center for Environmental Law herself. And ISEL is also a member of the Civic Space Sub-Working Group. The topic of civic space and their status is on the rise since the last couple of years, and concern about how the state of civic space are, let's just say, mutually shared across regions from ASEAN, the Africas, the Americas, South Asia, and Europe. The fact that there is a specific civic space sub-working group during Indonesia's presidency in G20 and in C20 it's a momentum itself that all of us should reap the benefit to improve and expand the to improve and expand the civic space condition around the globe. Here in Indonesia, as perhaps all of the Indonesians might well aware about, we have cases after cases each year that shows that our civic space has shrunk in almost all actors, from whether they are expressing their freedom of expression in the academia, or whether to implement their freedom of association in religion, or freedom of speech in social media. And our colleague here, Cornelius Hanung from Civicus, Nestor Harte from ICNL, Anita Wahid from Public Virtue, and Ereto Nugroho from PSHK, as our resource person, will delve deep into these issues in the following minutes. And this webinar itself will mark and launch the activity for the sub-working group of Civic Space, and we invite all of you who share the same concerns like all of us here to sign up for our circular activities, and together we will try to address the shrinking civic space issues during Indonesia's presidency in G20 this year. Thank you for your attention, everyone, and right back at you, Shani.
Terima kasih Kak Gita, thank you Kak Gita. Selanjutnya saya persilahkan Kak Imelda Usnadibrata selaku Chair.
I would like to invite Ms. Usnadibrata as Coordinator Working Group Education Digitalisation of Civic Space C20 to give the welcoming remarks from Secretariat, which is the role of C20 platform to bring civil society's voices and agenda to the G20 leaders. For Ms. Imelda, time is yours. Thank you very much, Ms. Jenny.
Director, Indonesian Center for Law and Policy Studies, and also distinguished speakers, Pak Hanung, Ibu Esther, Ibu Anita, Pak Erianto, and all the participants. Welcome to this public discussion webinars that initiated by Civic Space Sub-Working Group. As you know, that C20 Indonesia is one of the engagement group to support G20 that will be conducted in November in Bali, and it's a forum for civil society organization from around the world to bring people voice and agenda to G20 leaders, and it has attract more than 800 CSO to join in. And specifically in this working group, as you know, in C20 Indonesia we have 7 working groups, and one of the working group named Education, Digitalisation, and Civic Space Working Group. And so far we have more than 160 people around the world from 36 countries who have joined this working group. So it will be great to know each other, and also the existence and also the contribution of Civic Space would be very helpful to make people understand and also to participate more on the issues related to civic space. So we are very more than welcome, and then with the expectation that with this continuous discussion and also dissemination of policy paper, we can finalize all the policy papers in the national dialogue for C20 that will be conducted in July and will be sought for the G20 leaders in November. Thank you very much for this great initiative from Civic Space Sub-Working Group. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kak Imelda. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll jump to the next session. We will have the presentation of each speakers, and each speakers will be given 20 minutes each to deliver their presentation. I will firstly invite the first speaker, Mas Cornelius Hanung, as the Advocacy and Campaign Officer for Asia region at Civicus. In this opportunity, Mas Hanung will explain to us about the global trend on shrinking civic space and also its restrictions against activists and also human rights defenders. So without any further ado, Mas Hanung, the time is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Jenny, for the opportunity. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Hanung. I am the Advocacy and Campaign Officer for Asia of Civicus. And it is our pleasure to join with today's webinar, and also as part of the C20 Working Group of Civic Space, and it is our humble privilege to be joining with distinguished participants and panelists as well to start the discussion today by giving the global overview on the civic space that we have at the moment. Although it's my presentation is going to be a mix between the global review and as well as the Asia, because I'm currently focusing on the Asia. And hopefully this can also be a precursor for other presenters who are going to speak after me after this. Okay. Just to give a description about who we are, Civicus Alliance is a global alliance of civil society organizations and activists dedicated to strengthening citizen action and civil society throughout the world, with more than 9,000 members in more than 170 countries. And we are currently headquartered in Johannesburg, South Africa, but with a presence in Asia as well. And when we talk about civic space, the civic space that we in Civicus envisions, and I hope we also share the same understanding that civic space should be a foundation of open and democratic society, a condition where people and civil society organizations are able to organize, participate, and communicate without hindrance, and claim their rights and influence the political and social structures around them. So in Civicus, we believe that there are three underlying and fundamental issues concerning civic space, which is freedom of assembly, freedom of associations, and freedom of expressions, which becoming a foundation for civil society and publics and people in general to actually hold the government accountable for their duty to promote, protect, and fulfill human rights and fundamental freedoms. So one of the ongoing works of Civicus that have been done in the past is we actively monitoring the trajectory of the situation of civic space worldwide through our monitoring platform called Civicus Monitor, in which we have a collaboration with partners on the ground to document events, both positive and negative developments that might affect the fulfillment of the government obligations to protect and expand civic space. Based on the documentations that we conduct with partners, and then we also do online monitoring via social media platform and news as well. We together with partner codified and then kind of like interpret the situation of civic space in certain countries into 5 distinct categories of civic space, which is open, narrow, obstructed, repressed, and closed. And when we are talking about the rating that we have, what is actually we mean by open, narrow, obstructed, repressed, and closed? I just want to give a very short description about it. When we say about open civic space, means state both enables and safeguard the enjoyment of civic space for all, with low level of fear, with citizens free to exercise fundamental freedom without restriction in either in law or practices. Authorities are demonstrating tolerance against criticisms and also significant adherence to international law and standards. And narrow civic space means violations occasionally take place. Restriction on the right to protest sometimes be utilized as well, either through denying a permission for protest, citing security concerns, excessive force, and then the states also undermine press freedom either through strict regulation or by exerting political pressures. Moving on to the obstructed civic space, where civic space is heavily contested by power holders, by the imposition of legal and practical constraints, and then although CSOs exist in the countries, the use of illegal surveillance, bureaucratic harassment, and demeaning public statement have often been used to undermine the existence of the civil societies. And also there's a heavy censorship imposed to undermine press freedom and freedom of expressions. Repressed civil society, meaning civil society is significantly constrained and challenged, and the human rights defenders and activists are at the constant risk of being surveyed, harassed, intimidated, imprisoned, or even at risk of having injury or even death because of their legitimate work as human rights defenders. And also there's a risk of their registration and closure of civil society organization by the authorities, and heavy censorship and state-controlled media that undermines press freedom. And lastly, close, where there's a complete closure either in law and practice of civic space and constant fear among the society as well. So for more info, you may visit the Civicus Monitor website. And globally, we talk about civic space in conjunction with our research. Then the population data issued by the World Bank in 2020, we found that 44.7% population in the world today are actually living in a repressed civic space environment, while only 3.1% are actually benefiting from the open civic space that provided by the government, with a healthy civil society exists in the countries. And on the regional background, if you might see in the table, based on the data that we obtained as of 8 November 2021, repressed and closed civic space countries are kind of dominated in Africa, Asian Pacific, Middle East, and North Africa, with 2 of them are actually member of G20. So based on our research as well last year on the People Power Under Attack 2021, we also documented the top 10 violations to civic freedom worldwide, which is the first one is protester detained, intimidation, restrictive law, attack on journalists, harassment, journalists detained, censorship, HRD detained, excessive force, and protest disruption. So this is actually a global trend that we have, although when we zoom in later in a specific region, some trend might be more prominent than the other trend. For example, in Asia later, when I explain, it will be more on the restrictive law, but on the Africa region, for example, it is the detention of the journalists who are actually more prominent trend, but actually they share the same similarities based on our research. So when we talk about G20 countries and putting our research as well on the G20 countries, so it's quite concerning, if I may say, that 38% of population in G20 countries living under repressed civic space, and 31% living under closed civic space. So this might serve as a reflection from all of us, like how the civic space will be at the heart of the G20 leaders. And perhaps it's also become we can be more alert on how the civic space discussion in G20 can actually moving forward, just because seeing at this trend. So in Asia, for example, only 1 country actually rated as open civic space. 3 countries, Japan, Mongolia, and South Korea, rated as narrow, and 4 are rated as closed civic space, which is China, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam. So most of Asian countries are actually rated as obstructed and repressed. And moving on to the top violation of civic freedoms in Asia Pacific, we document restrictive law as the prominent issues, followed by HRD detentions, protester detained, journalists detained, and protest disruptions. And before I moving into detailed situations, in 2021, we decided to upgrade the civic space rating for Mongolia from obstructed to narrow for the reasons that I'm going to explain later. And we decided as well to downgrade Solomon Island from open to narrow because of the recent crackdown on civic space, and Singapore from obstructed to repressed because of the adoption of series of restrictive laws that will make civil society at risk, for example, being charged with collusion with foreign agencies. So on restrictive flow, we document the use of national security laws and sedition provisions to charge human rights defenders and deny them bail. For example, in India with Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or UAPA, sedition law, and in Hong Kong with national security law and the sedition provision under the crime ordinance as well. And then defamation against the center in at least 13 countries in Asia have used criminal defamation laws to try to silence activists and critics in the past years. For example, in Thailand with Las Majes, Malaysia Communication and Multimedia Act, and also the recent anti-fake news ordinance that was adopted under the pretext of COVID-19, and Indonesia with the infamous Electronic and Information Transaction Law. And we also observed the increasing digital repressions, for example, in Bangladesh with the Digital Security Act that curb critical voices on social media, websites, and other online platforms. And also in the recently in South Korea on the discussion related to net neutrality law that's seeking for putting heavy censorship in South Korean internet content that becoming the concern of civil society organizations at the moment. And civil trends are also being observed in Pacific countries, for example, in Australia, where prosecutions against whistleblowers are still happening. And on Crackdown on protests, we documented at least 14 countries where the protesters are detained and the authorities have used excessive force against protesters in at least 12 countries. And in Myanmar, for example, mass protesters have happened and met by deadly violence by the ruling junta since the coup happened in February 2021, with thousands are currently being arbitrarily arrested and detained. And in Indonesia, activists protesting against the unilateral renewal of Papua's special autonomy law in July and August 2021 were detained and met with excessive force as well. And the authorities have also known to exercise excessive force against various protests, including those against Omnibus Law Cipta Kerja in 2020. And in Cambodia recently, the government used restrictions on COVID-19 to arrest, harass, and disrupt protests from Naga World Union members who are defending their workers' rights. And in India as well, our government exercised excessive force against farmers' protests in 2021. And similarly, COVID-19 restriction being used to detain protesters in Pacific region as well. Interesting trend that we have observed as well, but how the shutting down of public transport to deter protests has also been used to undermine the right to protest, and internet shutdown and throttling during protests, such as in India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, digital attack against protest organizers, and then harassment of protesters after a few days after the protest as well, such as happened in Thailand and Hong Kong. And the use of technologies such as the use of long-range acoustic devices against protesters, which this technology can emit high volume sound at various frequencies with ability to target the sounds to a particular area, which have been documented by media in Vietnam and Australia. On harassment and intimidation of activists and journalists, we documented a concerning trend about the use of extralegal tactics in at least 14 countries in Asia region in the past years in order to attempt to harass or intimidate activists, journalists, and critics into silence. And some of the trends that we documented, including the intensified surveillance and harassments in China and Sri Lanka, forced eviction and travel ban against human rights defenders, vilification and red tagging. I believe we all know about how the activists in the Philippines labeled as communist or terrorists by the regime of Duterte, and then smear campaigns and online attacks against journalists, as well as harassment against their family members, for example, in Bangladesh. And I just want to mention some of the names of human rights defenders and journalists that we're currently monitored, such as the prolonged arrest and prosecution of human rights activist Quram Parvez. He's a prominent human rights defender from Jammu, Kashmir India, who very actively documenting the human rights violations on that area, on that region. And then we also hear about the criminal charge against human rights defenders who speak about human rights violation and business activities, such as Fatia Maulidianti and Haris Azhar in Indonesia. And then journalists being harassed and detained, including Pham Duan Tran in Vietnam, a journalist, and also a journalist in China who reported the situation of Wuhan during the outbreak of the COVID-19, and Rosina Islam in Bangladesh. And harassment or intimidation of activists is also documented in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Samoa. So this list should be seen as a non-exhaustive list. This is just an excerpt of what we have been documenting. So this is actually just to give a pictures of what actually happening. And in order to balance, we also document some positive development, such as the enactment of the human rights defender law passed in Mongolia under the name of the Law on the Legal Status of Human Rights Defenders in April 2021, which is actually the result of a long work of the civil society organizations in Mongolia to push for a legal protection for HRDs on the ground. So this is actually one of the reasons why we changed the rating for Mongolia from obstructed to narrow, because we see it as a best practice in the region. And then the other positive development is also in India's Supreme Court's decision to establish an independent inquiry to investigate the use of illegal surveillance technology, Pegasus, against journalists, activists, and political opponents. And also Bhutan Parliament approved a bill to decriminalize same-sex sexual relationship, same-sex sexual relationship in 2020. So I put question mark here because, to be completely honest, the challenge are even more outnumbered the positive developments that we have. But I hope that in the future we can see more positive development, if I can be quite optimistic in this regard. Maybe starting with the G20 countries. Then before I end my presentation, I would like to say that the civic space and sustainable development is actually not a separate things. It's actually a very connected aspect, as the leaders of the country adopted the Sustainable Development Goal in Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, which actually have the commitment to protect civic space. And if we see that Sustainable Development Goals 16.7, which is to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision making at all levels, and then Goal 16.10 that ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislations and international agreements. So I guess in order for these goals to be achieved and to ensure the participatory decision making from all levels, including from the vulnerable groups, safe and enabling environment for public to participate and voice their concern without fear of reprisal, both either through restrictive law and practice, should be upheld in various fora, including by the G20 countries. And to establish that, basically, what we need is a healthy civic space. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. I hope I'm in time, and looking forward for the discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Hanung. Indeed, we hope to see more positive development in realizing more inclusive civic space in the near future. Thank you, Mas Hanung, for serving us a very comprehensive introduction for today's webinar topics context, so we can have more understanding towards what is actually civic space, along with its trend and typology, particularly in Asia Pacific context. Mas Hanung also has elaborated comprehensively about the restrictive law identified, as well as government action that exercise the that has been exercised in the realization of the shrinking of public space. But we do have hope. Indeed, as Mas Hanung also highlights some positive development throughout a global scale, be it in the form of policy, court ruling, or international remarks and conventions. So once again, thank you, Mas Hanung. Next, we have Mbak Esther Hartai. Mbak Hester is senior legal advisor at European Center for Not-for-Profit Law, or ECNL. Mbak Hester will be giving us the explanation about the global perspective of legal restrictions around the world affecting the civil society. So without any further ado, Mbak Esther, this time is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Perfect. And would it be possible to also share my presentation? Thank you. Perfect. So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Esther Hartain, and I'm a senior legal manager at the European Center for Not-for-Profit Law. And on behalf of ECNI, it is a great pleasure to be with you here today. Many thanks for inviting me to talk at this webinar. About ECNI. ECNI is a leading European research and resource center based in the Netherlands, and we at ECNI are helping to build conditions that enable civil society organizations to operate independently, be financially sustainable, have strong governance, engage in policymaking, and mobilize public support. Many thanks to Cornelius for outlining the broader challenges civil society is facing with focus on Asia. And now look more closely to the legal environment for civil society, the results of our monitoring, and focus on 4 issues that are particularly relevant for civic space and for the priorities of G20 and C20. So we are struggling, we are living at a time of converging crisis. Even before the pandemic, civil society was struggling to breathe. We have witnessed increasing restrictions and a closing civic space for the past 15 years now. Just in the past 5 years, Civicus Alliance has tracked 292 legal measures affecting civic space in 93 countries. Out of these measures, 73% have restrictive constraining civic space and civil society. I would like to highlight just 4 characteristics of this closing civic space trend. The first, the law is used as tool of repression. So what we see is rule by law instead of rule of law. The second is that the trend is global, as Cornelius also demonstrated it. There are countries from north to south, from east to west, both authoritarian states and democracies, which have proposed or enacted laws that constrain civic space. And the third is that this global trend is relevant not only for human rights organizations, but also for civil society working in development and providing crucial support to people in need. And the fourth is that governments use a diverse range of legal measures to constrain civil society. So it's not just about a bad NGO law, but it's also about a range of other laws such as tax laws, counterterrorism measures, national security laws, foreign agent laws, and so on. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated this democratic and regulatory backsliding on many issues, including civic space. ECNL and ICNL has been monitoring these restrictions through the COVID-19 Civic Freedom Tracker. According to our data, 178 countries have enacted some 585 measures in response to COVID that affect democracy and human rights, including the right to protest, rights to privacy, freedom of expression, access to information, and others. These numbers come in addition to the numbers I shared a moment ago on closing civic space. And many of these measures persist and become permanent. CSOs are facing various types of legal restrictions, so let me focus on four key trends and issues today. The first is related to security and civic space. So since 2005, 66% of all relevant communications sent by the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms were related to the misuse of counterterrorism laws and policies or other broadly defined security-related measures to limit work of civil society organizations and criminalize activists. This happened despite the fact that the Financial Action Task Force and other bodies have identified that the risk of counterterrorism financing abuse of non-profits is low. In relation to these, civil society organizations also face the so-called de-risking by financial institutions, which is a phenomenon of terminating or restricting business relations with clients or categories of clients to avoid rather than manage the risk. Oftentimes, CSOs experience this through difficulties to open a bank account or process payments or high maintenance fees or suspension of their accounts or others. And national level regulators interpret strictly and narrowly the anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing standards and the guidance to financial institutions. The Financial Action Task Force has identified the wholesale de-risking of non-profits as a problem, and most recently highlighted as such through its unintended consequence workstream. ECNI is just finalizing and will soon publish a report on the use of AI and technology for bank compliance. The latest developments show that there is an increased use of technology in the fintech industry to ensure compliance with anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing policies. It is still unresearched how it will affect civil society, but it will likely emphasize and amplify negative impact. This leads me to the second big trend, which is digital technology and the use of AI. AI systems operate at extreme scales and speed. Digital technologies have transformed the way we exercise our rights and freedoms. It has a positive impact through opening new opportunities for online assemblies or participation and e-governance and digital fundraising. However, recent reports show that it can be also weaponized to harm civil society, human rights defenders, and various marginalized groups. Collecting and storing data can be used against the person at any time without knowledge or awareness. And there has been an increase in the deployment of mass surveillance, for example, by facial recognition in policing. Also with AI, the potential to reinforce historical and systematic biases is high and can lead to racial and other types of discrimination. We have also seen data being repurposed, for example, data collected by the police through the COVID contact tracing app. During COVID, we have seen an unprecedented global surge in digital surveillance, with governments employing programs for mobile data tracking, apps to record personal contact with others, facial recognition networks, and drones to enforce social isolation regimes. We are constantly lagging behind technology. We need clear safeguards, including impact assessments, before the development and deployment of AI technologies. And the third global trend that I want to touch upon is related to climate activism. Climate activists and movements fighting against the climate crisis are under pressure across the globe. Over 70% of human rights defenders killed each year are standing up for the environment. They are victims of vilification and disinformation and have been labeled as eco-terrorists, extremists, or green criminals. According to our research, a growing number of laws are enacted to limit and ban the freedom of assembly to target climate protests or criminalize legitimate and legal methods by protesters. States and companies misuse the justice system to intimidate environmental activists and their organizations by initiating criminal prosecutions and strategic lawsuits against public participation or otherwise called SLAPs, or by carrying out surveillance on their communication and activities. Some states restrict the activities of CSOs and their ability to access funding or impose burdensome auditing requirements on them to silence their voices. These restrictions on civil society are contrary to the state's human rights commitments and undermine the climate mitigation efforts that are so critical to slow the climate crisis over the next decade. Civil society needs financial sustainability and access to funding to counter the global challenges of climate change, securitization, and the misuse of technologies. One of its most important sources of funding is private giving. Philanthropy amplifies the power of people to create a better world and supports the engagement of individuals and communities in this process. The research conducted by ECNI shows some policy and legal trends that stifle giving. In some countries, a group who wants to launch a public campaign to raise money through collection box or online, when important cause, such as food for homeless shelter, would first need to obtain a permission from the authorities through a lengthy and burdensome administrative process. If the group wants to receive funding from another country, it may need to request permission from the authorities and be subjected to burdensome oversight. Bank delays and lengthy administrative procedures may also hinder fundraising for emerging needs, such as a natural disaster, where rapid response is crucial. In some countries, laws require that all donors are identifiable. This makes using certain fundraising methods, such as a collection box, nearly impossible. So instead of such restrictive measures, the focus should be on the appropriate use of those funds. States have signed international treaties to promote the freedom of association and facilitate access to resources. Under those treaties, restrictions are the exception, and only insofar as restrictions are necessary and proportionate. Civil society cannot work and manage crises while being restricted. We need enabling environment for their work. This is why civic space needs to be central to C20, and it is so important to have this discussion today. Let's make civic space a priority. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Esther. I think still in line with Ms. Hanum's presentation earlier, Esther continued highlighting the trend of restriction of civic space towards legal channel throughout regions and times, as well as the impact of COVID-19 pandemic towards civic freedoms, together with several conditions and also global trend that enables the realization of the shrinking of public participation. Thank you so much for the extensive research, Esther, very well presented. Next, we have Mbak Anita Aswini Wahid as the researcher at Public Sphere 2 Research Institute. Mbak Anita will explain to us about the challenges on CSOs and civic space advocacy, both about misinformation, also hoax, and also disinformation. Mbak Anita, dipersilahkan.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. This is an evening for me. It's almost 7 p.m. At my place, and I'm really glad that I got on the third speaker to speak right now, because I get to listen to the other two, and frankly speaking, I learned quite a lot from them. And while the other first two speakers were speaking more on the global perspective, I think right now what I'm trying to say is going to be on a more locally context as in Indonesia, but also at the same time, we will be able to see that the same pattern that is happening in Indonesia is also happening throughout the world as well, in other parts of the world. And I already told the administrator that I would be using Bahasa Indonesia, but somehow English came out of my, of my mouth. But I think I'm going to switch to Bahasa Indonesia right now because I think most of our audiences are Indonesians and probably will relate to me much easier in Indonesia. And I think Mbak Esther will be helped by our interpreters as well. So ya, saya akan ganti bahasa Indonesia aja ya gitu karena memang sebenarnya lebih mudah buat saya untuk menjelaskan.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to use Bahasa Indonesia for respecting our participant. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity for me as a speaker. Please kindly keen to share my presentation on screen.
Oke, jadi
My dearest colleague and ladies and gentlemen, as we talk about the civic space, it's become narrowing, shrinking as well. We heard a lot of information from the previous two speakers, how highlighting there's so many violations which happen and restriction implemented throughout the countries, and it's restricted to the freedom of the civic space, not just on the Asia Pacific continent but also around the world. I love to hear the fact that Mr. Hanung shared about how it's happened in the Asia Pacific. It has similarity with other countries too, with the restricted law and human rights defender detained, and also protester detained, journalists detained, and also protest distractions. If we're able to put the binocular on this diversity of violations, there's one thing that's so common happened within the process of implementations. There's a disinformations, as we took or we call as a hoax in terminologies. Hoaxes is exactly interchangeable between the disinformation and hoaxes. I will not use the misinformation because misinformation with disinformation is different. It has a different intentions of the makers of that news, or intentions that the makers use, and objective they would like to destroy or sort of like a damage and harmful impact to other people or not. But within the facts, it could be an information that being crafted and engineered to damage something objectively, but by people who spread out and they don't know that it has that kind of bad objective, but they share that content as a misinformations. Because the process is very complex, I will call all of this type of the news as a hoaxes, because it's going to be very complicated for us for defining the terminologies of this. So how a content become a hoaxes and threats to democracy in Indonesia, and also affected or impacted throughout the world. We also need to see the development or the expansion of these facts. Let's see on the next slide how hoax as a weapon of political and ideological contestations. If we saw or put these hoaxes as a weapon, it's not like new phenomenon for the last decade or 2 decades recently. It's become something that's so actively being used, implemented, especially on between countries competitions related to a intelligence operations. It's related with a powerful country like the United States versus the other communist countries like Uni-Soviet and other countries as well. And after that, the United States versus European continent, and then facing Russia and other countries too. In the past, they will call it as an active measures, not disinformation. As we see how this digital technology booming and accelerated, people will not receive those kind of information on the delay of broadcaster, right? From TV or newspaper, printed media, but they directly have the access of this digitalization, and the impact is so massive and harmful because it's reaching a very large audience in a very short time and very small cost. And the effects is directly goes to the civil society and manipulated emotions of the receiver when it's happening continuously, non-stop. It's not just impact to the emotions, but also to behavior and also mindset. And it builds a bad behavior. In Indonesia, we observing how this becomes something that's so massively spread on 2014 elections, on when we saw the governor elections in Jakarta. But I would like to skip that part. I would like to show how the process that we faced from the 2012 and then to the 2019 on the presidential elections impacted massively to the public civic issues, especially to the freedomness of the civic space that become more restricted than before. Next slide, we can skip this. Let's move on. Is we able to put the observations on how the hoax as the weapon of the constitutions, ideological and political, is a direct impact, what we call as a polarizations. The polarization is not just happening in Indonesia, it's not something that trends only in these countries. We saw it happens in the United States, in England, in all of the European continent, in every lot of countries is being massively distributed. The question that raised, does this polarization is being crafted purposely, or does it going to be in only an impact, and then it's going to be and the content that being utilized is only these informations, and then there's an impact after that process which is called polarization. But what we have to put attentions most, how these polarizations impact massively on how the civic space become narrower or becomes shrinking, especially to the activisms of human rights or civic space fighter or freedom fighter. And then within they had, uh, and within those people's had, there's only one context which is happening, which is us versus them. There's no other organization or other groups. The other groups is treated by groups that could multi evolve, like for example, analogically, if someone is sleeping or one groups, it's small groups, let's say in what certain circumstances, that could be considered a part of us. And there's other incure occasions happen or events happened, and then if that groups have changing behavior happens, it's become part of them too. So within the context, which is we have to see is the aspect of the polarizations. In this context, people able to observe from a very direct glasses or binocular if they're coming from something that positive, and then what is exactly coming from other groups is only bad things happened or sources from that groups. Each of the groups believe that one the only group that's fighting or have the patriotisms of our country is our group, and the other groups is them that would like to destroy the countries. So therefore, this both of these groups only able to see from the binocular that everything that I did, I do, and that group did and do because of the patriotisms or loving to this country. And there, the bad groups, it's their reasoning is because they hate us. The bad things happened, again impacted to the death, to the that kind of mindset, and there's a competitiveness. They feel that they become the victims of that groups, and then these victims have the justifications to conduct or doing the violences of things which is unjust or not fairly to the civic society or impacted bad to other groups. And we're able to see how the monetization happened on these two group of polarization. The most harmful impact happened to the civic space is exactly the cognitive thinking. So they're only able to think some everything from a very dichotomy, glasses or binoculars, when they're faced on the certain circumstances, conditions around us or around them. They only have the ability for that two binoculars and two way of thinking or two way of looking. One of the examples, if within our country, Indonesia, on the KPK, especially on the anti-corruption educations agencies, especially on the enactment revisions, the way our mindset or the way our frameworks are being, being embedded, being forced to the civic society. There's no other options. What about you? Are you have these anti-radicalisms? You're supposed to be or supposedly agree with the revision of the enactment or from the law or regulations because it's for destroying or diminish, to make those radicalisms gone. And if you disagree of that revisions, it means you're the person that pro radicalisms. This condition happens in every cases, in every public or civic cases. In Papua, our society being forced to see from two binoculars. Are you pro Indonesia or pro separatisms? If you are pro Indonesia, you supposedly or you supposed to be agree or whatever conducted in Papua because it's for fighting the separatisms. But and then within the human rights, Ginekala, how the violation of the human rights happening in Papua or the shrinking or the narrowing of those natural biodiversity and resources, and then there's some social economic gaps happening in real in Papua. Those contexts couldn't be part of the narrations or narrative in polarization methods. They will consider as a pro-separatism context. Also, the same happened with the omnibus law. When we're facing these cases, what we face upon, we have the narrative like this. The narrations goes to, are you pro to the economic growth or anti-growth? And at that time, on that circumstance, when we're facing the COVID pandemic, it's happening. That's a pro-Indonesia, pro-government, or whether you are pro-foreign countries. Because in the past, people were giving criticisms to the government because they think the government didn't see what happens in other countries and they deny to whatever happens within that development, also how the pandemic impacted in Indonesia. And the fourth part, the dichotomies mindset, is happening until this very time as we speak. The cases up and down, but they have a very strong basis on the dichotomy mindset. If you remember the last demonstrations, the way the dichotomies, the way the society think is the way they look on cases of the example if there's violence happened to Adi Armando and the first content that the society see the demo went wrong, the student went wrong, the college student went wrong, and then the people that's shouting about human rights is the one that have the mistakes and the flaws, but the other segment of people was seeing like human right defender the way they saw this condition. In the recent few years there's some patterns within the demonstrations happening or being disturbed. In certain time, there will be a disturbance on the peaceful protest or peaceful demo. It's become massively chaos. There's a certain chaos. There's a certain riot happens. We cannot see the source, but it's happening. It impacted for some groups. Have a dark using dark costumes or dark clothes. They come so fast, penetrate an area, they conduct an actions, and then they move so fast, and then they went out so fast as well. So this kind of activities can enter or penetrate to the polarization groups, or could be enter, but they couldn't see the bigger pictures, only based on that narrowing shallow minds. We have to be very careful on the Hux's cases because we easily can be manipulated because we only saw the content from the dichotomy binocular. Let's move on to the next slide. If we talk about the relevancy of the democratic regressions, we see how hoax and this disinformation is being utilized of the anti-democratic actors to or creating confusions of political situation for society. I will call it as a information operations. This hoaxes, if we put this segment on that operation informations, there's few objective or the missions of everyone who have the agenda. The first is exactly to create or, or changing within the society mindset and sympathize to certain groups or certain people. There's so many methodology. It's also included like prevalency hoaxes usage with other features that provided on the digital technology. In this way, we talk about our servings, showing about there's a support massively from grassroots to certain groups or certain figures. Or the other way is to create or amplifications, a narrative that's a story, from a marginal groups, but it's a hoaxes. It's artificial, it's crafted, it's engineered. There's so many false news that manufactures as it's supported, look like supported, and then stimulate the sympathy on the society. And using this informations is reducing the opposition participations. So the criticisms is will be decreasing or degrading. For people that criticizes these situations, that have this kind of mindset or perspective, they are uncredible people or personal. But again, this information that massively used, one of the example, defamations, doxings, and then also hacking and hacking of smartphone to retrieve the documents. They will break it down and you will be see as a person that uncredible and untrusted, so people will not trust you when you say something to them. And this intimidation or harassment that our two previous speaker has mentioned as well. This is exactly the methodology or ways of reducing or degrading the participation of the opposition's participation. And that's becoming trend. What is in cure will be there's a fake group or fake tags or fake events. Fake tags will be goes along with the account hacking. On that account, there's any information that being distributed or broadcast that invite a lot of people to do criminalities or doing riots, and people were able to be massively engaged. There's a criminal charges that being assessed to that people, and we could see there's a fake groups as well, like SMK group. It's also showed. Actually, there's a news about it. When we check the phone number, exactly a certain people that were not inside that group that talk about being discussed in the group. That's one of the ways to decreasing the opposition participation. The other mission or objective is reducing the quality of publication environment to create confuseness, reach of the society. Usually, it's quite harsh and harmful as well. They were creating chaotic situation or riots as well. And even too, if the events running peacefully, but they create confusion at the same time, they are stimulating the reach of the society because the mindset they will think there's a certain group behind these matters or what happening that make us go on rage or angry or mad. There's another way as well to do some disturbance or disturb the communications. For example, we go call it as a hashtag poisoning. A certain group that started this campaign, for instance, that giving hashtag, and then the hashtag will be poisons and all together attached with the previous hashtag and it's changing. So it's possible to do and then to expand by utilize or weaponing these informations. The other objective they could achieve as well to decreasing the information's quality that available. More this information goes in the social media, the more the merrier of those disinformations it will decrease the quality and cover those qualified news within this information's environment. And within the algorithm exploitations and then exploitation of the other features within this social media and technology and digital technology and utilize as well, or using a fake media that showing there's a relevancy on the mainstream medias. And then there's a artificial or defaming or reframing certain figures and stimulating like triggerings that's a conspiracy theories with the suspicions. And so this is exactly a way that could be conducted by these anti-democratic actors that make us vulnerable. Mainly, it's not just become vulnerable to the disinformation itself, become more fragile or vulnerable. How the society look upon our struggling or efforts with these multi strategies and also the objective that being set, the society is easily will goes have the perspective on human rights defender, activists. They are the people which is incredible to be trust. The only people that would like to make chaotic riots and create instability for this country and would like to giving the belittle it, the society or giving those kind of shrinking of society. Yes, they have authority access to do repressions to this group, especially to the oppositions or to the human rights defenders. For example, why? Because the society put trust that they are the people that would like to do destabilization on the countries. So they are not the eligible person or figures to be trusted and being defamed in other ways. This factual that will create the civic space or civic society, a civil society movement become wrong, and there's so many restrictions happen as well. Let's go to the next slide. We also have another way that being used because this information is never goes by themselves. They will go to the propaganda competitions as well. They will work together. They will go alone, and then using influencer, buzzer, there's a micro targeted influencer, and then media manipulations and using troll to spread out and then to doxings as well, and then could be to do intimidation or legalize the intimidation itself, could be used for stimulating or triggering the executions, and can be used as well to giving permit to use to misuse the policy and legalization or regulation to their interest. What we can see in Indonesia, what happens on the ITE law and regulations that always being used to giving to opposition or people who criticize to silence them. And we had the control of the informations on the shutdown or restricted or budget googling in terms of hoax labeling. One for example, if you dislike with one special or criticisms, they will say it's hoaxes. It's very easy. Like omnibus law. President Jokowi said people criticize omnibus law, they're the one who eat the hoaxes. They label it directly. One of the minister in Indonesia, if the government says hoaxes, this is hoaxes. Why you have to ban or sort of like contradictive with that? There will be, a truthful from the government and then giving label for people that have a different kind of opinion is invalidation and you don't need to read or heard about it. There's another law regulation number one in the year of 46 that related to the hoaxes, about public chaos or riots. So this is exactly things that we have to pay attention to even more. This law number 1, 1946 on criminal code, used to accuse critics or inciting public disturbance. We need to remember that this digital technology is always expand. At the moment, perhaps we think that this digital technology is such a great access for the advancement of the country, but there's anti-democratic actors learned about it. They repress the civic space and destroy the democracy itself on their interests. And currently, if we understand and find the best way and strategical ways to do it, they will expand anyway. It's become an effort that's so difficult to stop. And we are sort of like chasing and pursuing these people who are used these informations for their conversation political objective. And then the price that we have to pay is the diminish or the damage of our democracy. I think I passed my time. So thank you so much, Miss Jenny. Over back to you.
Terima kasih banyak Kak Anita atas paparannya. Izin memberikan sedikit conclude gitu ya. Pertama bahwa penggunaan disinformasi atau misalnya hoax menjadi satu bentuk ancaman terhadap demokrasi Indonesia, utamanya sebagai senjata politik gitu. Hal ini kemudian melahirkan bentuk polarisasi dan juga pola pikir dikotomis yang berpotensi
brings the polarization that sometimes it brings to the violence, and also some informations that explained by Bu Anita from Papua to the Omnibus Law and then COVID-19. If we see generally, it is the democratic system in Indonesia. And Ms. Anita also strengthened all the presentation from the previous presenters about the repressive way of the government that they're doing in order to shrinking the civic space. Thank you very much for your great presentation
about the context and also challenges in the realization of civic space, in the realization of democracy itself. Our last speaker will draw all of the mentioned context and challenges into one package of information of what the sub-working group of civic space aim to do and push forward in the future, derived from our priority issues. To Mas Eri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Jenny. I will share my slide. Thank you. Good afternoon for all of you, participants and speakers in Indonesia time zone. And good morning, I guess, for some of the participants and speakers from different time zone. Thank you for the opportunity for me to present the priority issues of the C20 Sub-Working Group Civic Space. This is the priority issues discussed and developed by the working group in February 2022. It was prepared as a draft to be discussed in the C20 kickoff meeting in Bali in March. Most of my presentation is from the draft document of priority issues developed by the working group. I will add some background, context, commentaries, and some sample cases and analysis in this presentation. Since the draft document of this policy issues is in English, so I will try my best to present it in English, because if I present it in Bahasa Indonesia, it means that I have to simultaneously translate the priority issues developed in English by the working group, translate to Bahasa Indonesia, since there are many specific and technical terms used. To avoid mistakes in my translation, I think it's better for me to try to present it in English. However, of course, in a discussion and question and answer, I would be more than happy to discuss in Bahasa Indonesia. So I will start with the priority issues. So these are the priority issues developed by the working group. There are 3 priority issues. First is protect and expand civic space. The second is to put an end to attacks, criminalization, stigmatization to civil society actors. And the third is build and strengthen partnership with civil society actors in public policy development and decision making. As a background, I think we developed these 3 priority issues based on the context and background, considering the challenges presented by a previous speaker. For example, as presented by Esther Harte from ECNL, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 73% legal initiatives since 2017 are restrictive measures. And from Civicus, Mas Hanung mentioned about more than 40% of people in this world live in countries rated as having repressed civic space. And there are many other various index and data from Freedom House. They reported 14 years of continuous decline in the protection of global political and civic rights, and the economies and various index and data showing the shrinking civic space is happening. And the global phenomenon of the shrinking civic space is also happening in Indonesia and other countries, also mentioned by Mas Hanung, the first speaker. So these are 3 priority issues that will be discussed in the sub-working group of C20 Civic Space. And we will develop call to actions or recommendations for the G20 leaders based on these 3 priority issues. I will start to discuss with the first priority issues, protect and expand civic space. Our call to action or our recommendation is that states should protect and expand civic space by creating and maintaining a safe and enabling environment for civil society actors. And states should strengthen CSOs, and also states should address the global trend of the compression and shrinking of civic space by revoking and revising laws and policies that restrict civic space. The sub-working group sees civic space as an environment for civil society actors to influence the political and social structures around them. And we see civil society as an essential component for the promotion of the rule of law. That's why our call to action, our recommendation is that states should create and maintain a safe and enabling civic space in which civil society actors can operate freely and legally protected. The second priority issues is to put an end to attacks, criminalization, stigmatization of civil society actors. As discussed by previous speakers, our recommendation that states should protect civil society actors from violence, judicial harassment, stigmatization, and other types of attack by both state and non-state actors. And then states should investigate and hold those responsible of attack toward civil society actors accountable. And states should monitor and report on cases of human rights violation. We discussed this second priority issues since this issue also acknowledged by the previous C20 in Italy. So this is also an issue that is acknowledged by the C20 Policy Pacts 2021 in Italy. They mention about the situation that in some countries, activists are persecuted, victims of fake news, happens in violent, and there are killing of representatives of indigenous organization in Latin America, and various other attacks and harassment. These attacks and harassment also appear in other findings of data and research. For example, from the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, they recorded more than 2,000 attacks between 2015 to 2019 to human rights defenders. And roughly 40% of the total carried out using a legal or judicial system, including SLAP, strategic lawsuit against public participation, and other lawsuits, both civil and criminal, and also arbitrary detention and arrest, as well as unfair trials. So this is already concern around the world, and also in Indonesia. In March 2022, 11 CSOs, which are members of the C20 Sub-Working Group Civic Space and C20 Sub-Working Group Digitalisation, made a statement about the judicial harassment against human rights defenders Fathia Maulidianti and Haris Azhar. The 11 CSOs call on the government of Indonesia, who is now the chair of the G20 presidency, to immediately stop the judicial harassment. The statement said that Indonesia's position as chair in the G20 presidency has placed the country under global scrutiny for its policies and acts. So having human rights defenders as suspects while practicing their freedom of expression would be a question to the commitment of Indonesia in promoting human rights during Indonesia G20 presidency. As for the third priority issues, build and strengthen partnership with civil society actors in public policy development and decision making. The sub-working group recommendations are that states should create a sustainable partnership with civil society actors and build full participation in public policy development. States should create a meaningful engagement with CSOs in national and global decision-making process. States should support the participation of civil society actors at all levels decision-making processes. Something that is rarely acknowledged is that the freedom to criticize the government in the civic space actually accelerates innovation and economic progress. So civil society and the civic space is contributing to the economic progress and innovation. And participation of civil society actors also improves the efficacy of a political system, as well as policy development and implementation. And civil society participation clearly make a critical contribution to the prevention of conflict and the fight against impunity and corruption. Lastly, we would like to invite for all of you interested in getting involved in our sub-working group communication network, please register to this link provided in the slide. The C20 Sub-Working Group on Civic Space is a platform through which CSO and civil society actors can network in order to enter into a dialogue about the issues on civic space with the G20. That's the three priority issues developed and proposed by the sub-working group C20 on civic space. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mas Erianto, for the explanation and comprehensive elaboration of the sub-working group of C20 as well as its priority issues. We really hope that more organizations will join in the loop, so we can establish a more fruitful discussion and also have a more comprehensive and holistic list of issues and recommendations to be delivered to the G20 forum. Thank you so much, Mas Eri. So for now, we will move on to the next section, which is a Q&A session. And for this, I will switch again into Bahasa Indonesia, considering that there's quite participants from Indonesia right here. Ya, baik Bapak Ibu sekalian, sekarang kita masuk pada
ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the session, question and answer, or for all of you who would like to ask the question, you can use the chat box feature and Q&A on your Zoom, or maybe you can do the raise hand. Our committee will help you to allow your mic to be able to speak to the resource persons. Maybe for the first one who would like to ask a question, if you would like to ask a question, you can please raise your hand or you can type it on the chat box. So I see here Mr. Michael Peuki raising hand. So the committee maybe can allow him to speak. So if it is already available, maybe Mr. Michael can ask your question directly. Thank you very much for the chance. So I am Michael. I am from Papua. I'm from Wahana Lingkungan Indonesia, Walhi Papua. Here I would like to ask regarding to the civil movement, especially in the environment. Is there any platform that can strengthen us for our movement for the environment related to the forest and also natural resources and also our land? I guess that's all for the question. Our indigenous land. Maybe Miss Anita can answer it right away. Okay. Can we please? Okay. Maybe there was trouble from Mr. Michael, so not everyone can hear his question. So I would like to go on to my question: is there any one platform that can strengthen us as the activists of environment, especially in the forest, the land, for the capacity building or the protection to protect the land and also our natural resources? Thank you very much. So Ms. Anita, maybe can you answer the question? This is a really hard question, yeah, because the area is very specific, which is about the environmental issue. So if we see in Indonesia, there are so many issues which is very, 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 very sensitive. So the people who are involving in fighting that issue, they are getting the attacks, whether the intimidation, harassment, or even they get the persecution, even they experience a physical attack or criminalization. One of the sensitive issues is that the environmental issue, which is related to the corporation who are exploiting the natural resources, and we know that they are not doing things to protect the sustainable
recovery for the situation of the environment. So if we talk about the protection and the capacity building for the people who are making the movement in environmental issues, so we have to see from many perspectives. Firstly, about the physical protection. So this is not only for the activists, but also for the people who are close to them, like, for example, a family, colleagues, and so on. And secondly, is the protection of the cyber safety and security. So we have to strengthen it. And the third one, the security of the communication process and also the coordination from all of you. So is there any platform special to do that? I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. But what I know is that each from those three, there is the platform. So I have no idea, yeah, Mr. Michael, are you only the activist from environment issue, or do you also involve in journalist activity? But for the first one, for the security, the physical security, is that you need to have really strong connection and also networks with your colleagues around you, and who are also concerning in the same issue. And you also need to know the group, but even though they are not only the environmental issue fighter, defender, but you also maybe can work together with the law enforcers, or maybe the human rights actors, or people who works in democratic issue. So during the process, when you are fighting for that environmental issue, so they are aware about that. So if something happened to you, they can give the advocacy. And also for second, which is the digital security, what I know is that in Papua, the situation is really complicated, right? Because Papua is the area which experience the bandwidth trouble. Sometimes the internet is shut down, and there are so many news from Papua, which is really hard to get out of from Papua, and we need the special access for the information and also communication. So here, actually, I honestly, I have, I've, I'm scared. I don't know actually what I can suggest to you, but for the strengthen is that we can do it. I mean, anyone can do that as long as they are working in the cyber security. So this, as long as they can do the protection. But for the big homework is that how to do the communication safely, because there are so many limitations in Papua, limitation and restrictions in Papua. For example, like the internet is shut down for one island, or sometimes the bandwidth trouble in one island. But sometimes other agencies says that this trouble only happen when earthquake happen in that area, but in fact there is no earthquake at a time. So there are so many excuses and also information which is not clear about why in Papua happens the information like that about the low connection of internet. So what I suggest is that to make sure that your connection, your information is being safe, you need to layer between the communication, whether you use the digital communication or in-person communication or offline communication. So you will not just rely on the network. And also you don't really need to rely on the gadget, which can be hacked or surveillance, or it has the malware that makes you really vulnerable to the protection itself. So that's why you have to make sure that the important information, the crucial information, you have to make sure that you can save it, you can keep it safely, so it can also protect yourself and your group. So next, maybe I can give it to Mr. Arianto or Mr. Hanung related to the for the platform that can be accessed by the people in Papua related to the environment or forestry. If it is enough, maybe I can move on to the next question. All right. Actually, for the environmental, maybe our moderator is more understanding, yeah, than us, and also especially for the law. But for us, is for the civic space context, we can add the judicial harassment that we know now is as Slack. So it can be the trouble that can disturb the people or the environmental activists in doing their job. So what we can do, one of them is to strengthen the regulation, anti-slack regulation, which is now already representing. So, Ms. Moderator, if I am making a mistake, please correct me, yeah, because there is an article related to that, and then also there is a scheme. We know that there is actually the announcement, also the information, the specific issue for the environment that can be done by that sector is only that. But for the judicial harassment, it can be done by state actors or non-state actors. But for the Slack, it is narrowing in different actors. But even though we know that almost the same, but we know that now it's getting more to the non-state actors. So what we can do is to strengthen the anti-slack regulation. So that's what I can add. Yes, it's true. Related to the anti-slack, we have already the law. We already have also the scheme. And what we can do right now, because we have the regulation and also the law for that, if you experience the Slack phenomenon, you can ask for the advocacy. I would like to underline the word, yeah, to highlight the word from Ms. Anita is that connection, having the networks, so we can have more strength and power, because it will help you. But I guess we have to stop there since we have more questions from Mr. Doni. So Mr. Doni is asking the question to Ms. Esther.
Or the realization of shrinking space itself. Dan yang kedua, pertanyaan ditujukan kepada Kak Anita, siapa sebenarnya produsen?
Miss Esther, the question is that who is the more responsible related to the shrinking civic space? So maybe we would like to invite Miss Esther.
That happens to have this shrinking space conducted. Floor to you, Esther.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, this is a very important and broad question. Thank you so much for Mr. Adrian to raise that. As I said, it's a global phenomenon, and there are the restrictions are also introduced intentionally and unintentionally by countries. So some governments introduce restrictions to silence civil society that are critical, but there are also some countries that introduce restrictions, or some restrictions are non-intentional, but aims to basically comes from the narrow interpretation or misinterpretation of laws and policies. And also, like what I mentioned, financial institutions also have a role related to this, because sometimes they do this bank de-risking. So that also leads to difficulties for civil society to access these services. So that's why all of us have a role to play, and I think civil society have an important role to play to raise the awareness of the impact of this kind of measures to the governments, financial institutions, international bodies, and also to advocate for change. And that can happen also on the national level, but also on the regional and international standards and policies, like what I mentioned a lot is anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing policies. And with the engagement with the FATF, the policies has changed that affects non-profits. So it is possible, and it should be a constant cooperation, coordination, and openness. And this kind of platforms like C20 should serve this purpose. I hope I managed to answer the question.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Esther, for answering the question comprehensively. Mbak Anita.
Yeah, Miss Anita.
Terima kasih Kak Jenny. Terima kasih juga Kak Doni atas pertanyaannya.
Thank you very much for the question. So, who is the producer of hoax in Indonesia? This is actually hard to answer, yeah. Because we know that there are so many hoax happens in Indonesia, but we never get the proof, which is really pointing that this is the perpetrators. Because sometimes the perpetrators is under different layers. So if we see in a structure, if we talk about the information or the hoax itself, it's just not suddenly coming to the society. Actually, they have the structure in making it and spreading the issue. So the top of the issue maker, it's really hard to reach instead of the lowest part, the lowest layer. The lowest one is someone who is responsible to spread the issue in some groups. And then another layer is that there is the command who is arranging their movement or the change. And then there is also another layer to do the evolution related to information. So for example, they see the movement and then they jumping platform to many platforms. So they are trying to see in which platform then that they need to change the narration. So that's the only thing that we can see, that even that's really hard. But if we are trying to see it, who is the main perpetrator, it's really hard to find. Because the hoax is coming from many layers and many actors. Because sometimes it can come from the government or maybe non-government actors or maybe the law enforcers or journalism or the media. Sometimes they are also can be the suspect for the hoax distributor. But even sometimes the fake media also exists. Sometimes they are using the expert for journalism, for instance, and then they have the clickbait, for instance. Even CSO can do the same way to do this. Sometimes they are doing it intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. But in the context of shrinking civic space, what we need to do is that not to concern on the perpetrator, yeah, not to the actor, but in how is the process of the spreading can influence and can impact the democracy. So we can map what we can do and what we have to do in some areas. So that's the thing that really important for me. But for the actor itself, it's really hard. But if we really want to do that, we have to join like the rich people group and to find their connection, who is really the hoax distributor, hoax maker.
Saya akan bertanya ke Mas Erianto yang ini. Apakah civic space juga menjadi salah satu isu saat presidensi Italia sebelumnya? Dan
The
apa
next questions would be, whether the civic space become one of the issue when the Italian presidency previously. What is challenge that being faced by the working group in the effort to intervene the process of the G20 negotiations? Thank you so much, Ms. Titi Suntoro, of the questions. On the
Civic space disebut di dalam policy pack-nya, tapi dia bukanlah merupakan
20 presidency, when the Italian were, held that presidency, 2021 is being mentioned at the analysis,
policy pack C20
what we call it, the
2021
C20 2021,
suatu isu yang
as an issue that become the highlights and need to be attended fully and become concerns in many countries. And also mentioned in the PAC document regarding the attacks on the judicial harassment type to the activism and stigmatizations and etc. So we could say it's being mentioned on the 2021 of the PAC as well on during the Italian presidency. Presidency. When the presidency were still on the hands of the in Italy. So the negotiations that being or interventions that being conducted, we conduct what we call as outreach to the civil society actors and civil society organizations. The objective is to involve ourselves, and together we are formulated the mindset to help or to assist and protect and expand the civic space, especially to develop the civic space. After that, the next step will be policy brief, that the drafting is being prepared at the moment. We're able to share the link to all of the participants that joining our webinar, and you could go to the C20 working group, especially on the civic space context. You're able to see the policy brief context that we going to prolong the discussions up to the month of July 2022. We hope we're able to finalize the draftings and we're able to bring this on the C20 meetings with other entities, also counterparts, and discuss it together. And this brainstorm become a dialogue important point that we could address to the G20 leaders. We would like to bring and invite everyone to join and then formulated those ideas and do the brainstorming for this integrated policy brief to the policy pack on the G20 addressed to the leaders. That is exactly the explanation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Arianto. I would like to go to the last questions addressed to Mr. Hanung, but I think all of the speakers able to respond to the question is also the closure statements or closing statement from the speakers. The question is being addressed personally to me, is there anything that we can do regionally to press the country to give protection or shrinking of the civic space? First of all, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hanung. Please kindly respond to the questions. Well, what we can do regionally, yes. Should I use Bahasa Indonesia or English? Bahasa Indonesia, please. Yeah, to create these protections, you need to mute your microphone. That's an echoing sounds. So I will use Bahasa Indonesia. I will continue then. So, dearest colleague, there's so many things that we can do on the level of regional. One of that efforts, if you see on other ASEAN countries in regional level, on the civic space ratings has variations. There's a repressed or closed kind of civic space level. This is type of the category that become a point of highlights on interregional solidarity within the region itself is very important, because we can see there's so many civil society in other countries that have limitations, which is more compared to Indonesia, and their voices need to be raised, need to be echoing to the public too, and to emphasize that these civic space efforts and struggling that we face have the same trends. The restrictive law is similar between what exists in, for example, Thailand and then Mongolian is the similar. So we could learn from that reality, like one another and another to another within the international forum or local forum regionally to ask the government responsibility, especially for the treatment or the way they react or not responsive to that kind of civic space protections. That is my response. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hanung. The floor will be go to Miss Anita. Briefly, what can we do regionally to really sort of like promote or encourage our countries or any countries, with this shrinking civic space? I believe like one thing that mandatorily we have to do consolidations. We have to do that in many variant of issue, multi-organization, multi-level, multi-society. We have to go with them, involve with them, and then bringing the trust, like bridging the trust back, especially to the democracy fighter, the vendors, human rights, and then the activisms. This is exactly a sort of like distinguished terms for our efforts to make us strong, and will not have the hoaxes or disinformation that will weakening the society themselves. And I believe this strengthens, and then this kind of trust, you know returning of that trust, getting or gaining the trust back is very important. I think all of my friends here agree with me. Thank you so much, Miss Anita. Next floor, Mr. Arianto, to respond, or do you have any additional comment upon the questions? Thank you so much, Mr. Hanung and Miss Anita have a complete answer. I will highlight some additional. What can we do best in regional level or regionally, as we have the G20 presidency and then we are the leader, and Indonesia also well known as an archipelago countries, big countries, and famous on Asia Pacific. We have to be a pioneer, a living example, especially in terms of giving protections, the betterment of the civic space, freedom of expression, freedom of association, assembly, and to organize, to gather, and the context of human rights events. So the protection have to go thoroughly, not just one segment or one aspect alone. It have to be happen in each of the region. Thank you, Mr. Arianto. Miss Esther, will be your response.
To pressure the state to protect or overcome this shrinking civic space issue. Please.
Thank you so much. I think my colleagues already mentioned most of it. I believe it's important to really push civic space and the environment for civil society to become a priority for C7 and G20, C20 and G20. And it's really important because it's important for their mission as well. There are many ways it affects issues relevant for them. And it's important to call upon the countries to meet their human rights commitments and support rather than restrict civil society in their countries. And thanks again for the invitation.
Okay, thank you so much, Esther. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Q&A actually marks the end of today's webinar. To wrap everything up, it has come to our knowledge that right now globally we encounter the phenomenon of shrinking of civic space and public participation all around the world that has threatened our democracy. Deriving from such phenomena, therefore collaboration within the CSOs mark as an important and significant step as a means to enrich knowledge and also experience changing, to push a common agenda for the realization of a solid cross-regional democracy. In realizing such goals, we are humbled to welcome CSOs all over the world to join the Civic Space Working Group by registering at the link that I have seen. Our colleagues has already put it on the chat box, so you can just click them over and go register yourself. For more information, please do not hesitate to contact us at subwg-cs@pshk.or.id or subwg-cs@pshk.or.id. Before closing the forum, I want to give my sincere thank you for all the speakers for the elaborative answers and for all the participants for your enthusiasm. See you at another time, and let's join the forces to construct an inclusive and accountable sphere for democracy for all. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank
you.
you, Jenny,
Thank
for
you,
moderating
everyone.
as well.
Thank you, Mas Hanung. Thank you, Mas Eri. Thank you, Kak Anita.
Thank you, Kak Jenny.
Thank you.